And I just love that quote, leap and the net will appear. And we literally did have kangaroos in the backyard, which I feel like is a bit of a stereotype for Aussies, but we actually did. And I guess that was the moment where I realized that history always has two sides of the story, right?
Hello grown-ups, welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up with me, your host, Sam Cooper-Gray. This week we have our first US-based guest, Meggie Palmer. She is the founder of PepTalkHer and is a seasoned journalist with global experience. In the interview today, she shares the highs and lows of working in the media to starting her own business about something she's incredibly passionate, along with giving us some great nuggets of advice. So please join me in welcoming Meggie to the podcast. Meggie, welcome. So I'll kick off with the big question about your journey into adulthood. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you.
Yeah, well, I was raised on a farm in Australia, a little bit outside of the Gold Coast for any of your Aussie listeners. And I'm the eldest of three kids. And so we had a very idyllic childhood, you know, with horses and sheep and dogs and that whole thing. And we literally did have kangaroos in the backyard, which I feel like is a bit of a stereotype for Aussies, but we actually did. Sometimes we would see them sort of jumping across the front lawn. And, you know, when I was a kid, I was really raised, you know, I'm a child of the 80s, I guess. And my mum and dad really taught us that girls can do anything, because this was kind of in the era where, you know, we were kind of coming into like moving towards equality, hopefully, eventually. And so I really had no idea growing up that I was any different to anyone else. And I really thought that I could do anything. And it wasn't until I had a rude awakening later in my career in journalism where that was kind of shattered. But yeah, I mean, I had an amazing childhood. The first thing I wanted to do was get out of there. And so my desire when I finished high school was less about what I was going to study, but where I was going to go. And that was going to be a long way from home. And so all I wanted to do was go to college. And I guess that's because I'd seen American films with like, you know, sororities and parties and red cups. And so, yeah, my whole thing was like, I want to get out of home, because my parents were great, but very, very strict. I spent most of my childhood grounded because I talked back too much. Shocking. Can't imagine that to be true. But anyway, ended up in Brisbane. An hour down the road, that was the big smoke, you know, like, wow, so far away from home. And so I really, I guess, became an adult amongst 200 or 300 of my best mates in college in Brisbane at the University of Queensland, where I was living on campus. And those were some of the best days of my life, you know, growing up and becoming an adult alongside my best mates, many of whom I'm still in touch with today. And so, yeah, I have such fond memories of becoming an adult. I credit a lot of I guess where I am today with my parents, of course, and what they taught me, and then, you know, the friends who become family along the way as well.
And as you said, you wanted to get out and go international. So tell me, like, how did you, because you're obviously US based now, tell me a little bit about that international journey.
Yeah, so the first step, I guess, was to get out of the farm and away from my parents. And then, long story short, I became a journalist. And so in Australia, as a journalist, you sort of tic-tac around a bunch of different regions, cities, towns, like, getting your sort of your stripes, I guess, like doing the 3 or 4 filing of stories a day in different networks. And then I ended up, long story short, I worked for a bunch of different networks in Australia, and I ended up actually in London, in your neck of the woods, Sam. I ended up over there working for the BBC and the BBC World, and did a little bit of time at CNBC as well over there. And so it's funny, you know, like Aussies really, I live in New York now, and a lot of Americans don't have passports. And some of my best American friends have never been to London, which honestly blows my mind, because growing up in Australia, you're so far from anything that all you want to do is get out there and experience it. And we kind of, I guess, have this imposter syndrome that we're like this little cousin that could maybe at the bottom of the world. And so we just want to travel at a very young age. Like, I did exchange to Italy when I was 15, and, you know, like, we just want to get out of Australia. And so I was keen to get some international work experience as well, to learn from different newsrooms, to see news and global affairs from a different perspective. I remember once, Sam, when I was, I don't know, I guess in my early 20s, I was traveling through Cuba on my own, and I went to a museum, and I was looking at this museum and the way that they had I guess, like, described what happened during the conflict in Cuba, and it was so different to what I recalled from modern history and from, growing up. And I guess that was the moment where I realized that history always has two sides of the story, right? And wherever you live and whatever news outlets you listen to or read or consume, that colors your perspective. And in
Yeah.
fact, no perspective is 100% true, right? There are always two sides of the story. And so I guess that was a big part of me of like wanting to get out of Australia to see how does the other half of the world think. And so that took me to London, and then, eventually ended up at the Financial Times in New York City, and then starting my own business. So it's been quite the ride, but it's been good fun.
So clearly very international. So, Italy as a teenager, and I don't underestimate how big a thing that is to come from one side of the world to another as a teenager, and then moving to London and then to the US, and, a bit of Cuba thrown in there. So, but then you literally, what I love about when I interview people, especially successful entrepreneurs, is they have these amazing careers and they go, oh, and then I started a business.
Yeah, so it's so weird, isn't it? How we just pivot. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that pivot.
Well, and I wonder if it's similar to a lot of the other guests that I've listened to, Sam, on your podcast, of like, I started my business out of frustration. And so I guess the reason I told you the story about growing up on a farm with my great parents is because they really instilled in me like really clear values about inequality and about justice and about if you see something, say something. They didn't teach me about office politics in the workplace. And so I had to figure that out through the school of hard knocks and made a lot of mistakes along the way because I was just like very righteous. And I was like, well, that's wrong and that's not okay. And like, I had this experience once where I found out because of a male ally, actually, he told me I was getting paid less than my male colleagues. And I just, Sam, like naively was like, oh, it's just an accounting mistake. They'll just fix it. I just was like, oh, well, like, obviously no one would do that. And I didn't realize up until that point that, like, of course, this is a systemic issue. And so but what a privilege, I guess, as well, to get into my early to mid 20s to not have had very many experiences of discrimination. And I think, the conversation we're going to have today about my business and closing the gender pay gap, it's important to acknowledge that, like, when we look at the data and the statistics that exist in terms of inequality in the workforce, it is really bad for women, right? On average, we're paid somewhere between like 12 to 20% less, depending on how you crunch the numbers, right? And those statistics are much worse for women of color, right? Much, much worse. And so I'll be talking in generic terms, but I just want to acknowledge that, like, the privilege of being a white middle-class woman is something that I want to acknowledge. And that gives me power that I actually have to use to support other people. And I think all of us listening today, it's important for us to recognize the power and the privilege that we have and to think really consciously about how can we use that to help support other people around us. And so anyway, yeah, I found out I was getting paid less. I thought it was a mistake. I figured they'd just fix it. And what they said to me, my network employer at the time, said to me, Meggie, if you don't like it, you can quit or you can take us to court. And I'll never forget a boss who said that to me. And no one wants to go to court. No one wants to get a lawyer. And I was like, kumbaya, let's be best friends, la, 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 here's a mediator. And of course, they just ignored it. They didn't take me seriously until I did engage a lawyer. I'm not a litigious person. I actually hate conflict. However, probably because of my upbringing, I felt very compelled to take this on because it's so wrong. Like, I'm sitting in the newsroom filing the same stories as him and the same stories as him. What do you mean you want to pay me less? Are you kidding me? And so anyway, I had to get a lawyer. I eventually had to sue them. It was not ideal. It led to a lot of anxiety for me personally. I ended up leaving that network, but I had savings. I had a great network and I was really, really good at my job. I knew I'd get another job. And I was like, but what if I was pregnant, or what if I was the sole breadwinner, or what if I had no savings and this had happened? I wouldn't have been able to like take them on. And so I kind of felt like an obligation, I guess, to kind of like do it for the next folks who would be coming after me in the industry and indeed at that network. And so that's kind of why I just got pissed off and blew it up, to be honest, Sam. So that's kind of how it started. And I stayed in the industry for a while and I loved journalism. Like, what a privilege. It never really feels like work. Like, I went to Paris and interviewed Brad Pitt on the red carpet. I drove into Syria and interviewed Bashar al-Assad at his palace in Damascus. Like, I've had an amazing career, interesting, meeting so many interesting people, interviewing folks at the highest of high of their moments in life, and also, during horrendous traumatic events like earthquakes and whatever. And so I've had this window into people's lives that I guess has propelled me in many ways to kind of end up doing what I'm doing now, which is running a company called PepTalkHer. Our mission is to help supercharge the success of women's careers. And we want to close the pay gap. We want all of you listening to earn more money. And yeah, we do that through executive coaching and through a lot of leadership workshops with large Fortune 100 companies here in the United States and also globally as well.
Amazing. And that shift from employee to entrepreneur, like how did
Yeah.
you find that shift from working
Yeah.
for someone to running your own firm?
So what I did, Sam, so when I was still working at it, I'd changed networks at this point. I was working for one network that I loved, and I actually I started going to an accelerator. So this was kind of when startups, I mean, they'd been around for a while, but it was kind of like startups were very trendy and there were all these accelerators. And so I paid a couple of grand. I joined this accelerator in Sydney and I started, my actual first idea, would you believe it, was a law app. I wanted to create like contracts on your phone. Even though I'm not a lawyer, I thought that would be a good idea. Anyway, didn't end up starting that business, but this accelerator program it was pretty intense, and it step by step held our hand to go from this is kind of an idea to this is a terrible idea. Let me come up with another one. So it was like baptism by fire. There was maybe 30 of us, many of whom I'm still friends with today. It was after hours. I would do it at night. I would do it on the weekends, and it kind of just gave me a framework. And what I learned, Sam, was that everything is figure outable. Do you know, like sometimes we're like, wow, Jeff Bezos, or wow, Bill Gates, or wow, like, you know, Whitney who started Bumble, like these amazing entrepreneurs. And actually, they're also just making it up as they go along too, right? Like they might have a different degree to you. They might have more money than you, maybe better family connections than you, but they're all figuring it out day to day. And I taught myself how to build our very first Pep Talker website using YouTube. I mean, that website was nasty. And I was up till 3 a.m. for like weeks figuring it out, but I figured it out. And like, I didn't do coding. I hated science at school. I was like, you know, a humanities and drama girl, but like, you can figure it out. Like, you know, like, I mean, I have a YouTube channel. You've got this podcast, like Instagram, TikTok. You can figure anything out now. And by the way, you can reach out to anyone and ask them for help and advice along the way too. And I've had people like you and others who so generously helped me along the way. I've been fortunate enough to be in the Tory Burch Foundation Accelerator Program. I got a grant from Sarah Blakely, the Spanx founder. So I've had all these women and these communities of folks who've kind of uplifted me and given me a piece of advice here or introduced me to someone here that has just totally changed the trajectory of my life, that I could never have imagined growing up on a farm in Gowanaba, right? But actually, it's really possible. And so anyone listening who's like, maybe I want to start a business, like you definitely can. You definitely can. And it's never been easier with the technology, with the payment services that are like, you can just like put in your email and sign up and you can take someone's money. Like it's really easy to start a business. It's hard to grow a profitable business, as you know from your background in banking. Like that part is actually very difficult. But to start a business and get going, like I think it's such a great ticket to freedom and possibility, and I'm a big fan.
You're absolutely right. And I think that just taking that leap and starting, that sometimes is the hardest thing to do.
100%.
So Meggie, you've navigated across, you know, being a journalist in a number of countries, starting your own business, managing those ups and downs. What would your 18-year-old self, as you went off to university, to college in Brisbane, what would she recognise about you?
I think it's such a great question. It's what a wonderful experience to sort of time travel with you. I haven't really thought about 18-year-old Meggie in a long time. I think she would recognize the joy that I feel. Like I was a nerd, Sam. Like I loved school. I loved it. I loved college. I loved university. Mainly I loved college and the partying and the chatting, but like I loved it, you know, and I think what I love about entrepreneurship is that I've been able to build a business that serves me and my life, as well as supporting my bank balance and that of my team, right? And so I think 18-year-old me would love the joy that I've created in my life. And also I think she'd be really proud of the fact that like I have followed my passion. And I can distinctly remember having a conversation with my dad in the garden years ago. I must have been maybe 18, maybe 19. And I was like, I'm going to be a journalist. And he was kind of like, do you think you should do a teaching degree as well, just in case? Because obviously media jobs, even then, were few and far between. And I remember saying to him, I was so naive. I was like, well, Dad, if you follow your passion, the money will come. And he's like, yeah, but if the money's coming in, it's a lot easier to follow your passion. So, and I think I think it is really hard to follow your passion sometimes, but I have miraculously managed to do that. And I'm so grateful because I don't get the Sunday scaries, Sam. Like, I love a Monday, love a Tuesday, love fun Fridays. I actually work a 4-day week intentionally so I don't have meetings on a Friday. So I call it fun Fridays because I do what I want. So like, I think 18-year-old Meggie would be kind of stoked, a little surprised that this is the way that life's turned out, but in a really fabulous way. Yeah.
So you touched on it, she might be surprised. So the thing she'd recognise is that joy that you feel,
Yeah.
I think. And
Yeah, I think so.
I'm guessing your determination as well, because it sounds like you were pretty determined even at that age. What would she be absolutely blown away by?
I think growing up in a regional town in Australia, I think we sort of don't really, we know that we're in the middle of nowhere. We know that we're not Sydney, we're not New York, we're not London, we're not Hong Kong. We're kind of like, we're the small fry, right? And I think 18-year-old Meggie would be kind of surprised that I'm in New York of all places. I think she would be surprised that I get to meet people like you, that I get to have conversations with people who I've long admired since I was a teenager in terms of entrepreneurs and successful journalists and successful actresses and stuff who are now part of my community and part of the people that I brainstorm with and problem solve with when we think about closing the gender pay gap, when we think about moving towards a more equal society. So I think she would kind of be shocked that I've managed to cobble this together somehow. Like, what has even happened, and I think a lot of us, and I think I held that for a long time, Sam. I think for a long time in my career, I was just happy to be there. I was just like, wow. I was kind of starstruck and just like a little bit shocked in a good way that I even had a career and that I even got to report the news and that I even got to meet fascinating people. Like I interviewed Hugh Jackman when I was like 20. And I was just like, what is happening? This is unbelievable. But I kind of was so shocked that for a long time, I was just in the back seat of my career. I was just like a bit like starry-eyed, like I can't believe this is my life. And what I kind of, not regret, but one thing that I always say to people is like, you really have to get in the driver's seat of your career, because even though you feel lucky to be there, even though you can't believe that you get these opportunities, you have those opportunities for a reason. And I think I thought that I was just lucky. I think I thought that it was a bit of a mistake that I'd managed to cobble this all together, honestly. I now know that that's imposter syndrome, and I certainly lived with that. I probably still live with that, to be honest, to this day. But in some ways that actually impeded me, I think, because my boss would say, move to Canberra, move to Melbourne, and I would say, yes, okay. And at some point I had to draw a line and be like, what do I want? Not what do the bosses want, not where do they want me to go, like what do I, Meggie, want? And that actually took a long time for me to learn how to even understand what that was, because I didn't know how to listen to myself. Because I was so busy kind of taking the opportunities where they came up that I didn't know what I truly wanted and what my North Star was. So I've had to kind of figure out better tactics to address that.
And I think that's so powerful, because I think it takes some of us our entire lives to work out what our North Star is. And I love what you said about, if you having the passion to go off and be a journalist and just going and doing it. Because I think one of the things I always say is, if you have a passion, don't worry about the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, go and do it. If you know what you want to do, go do it. Because if it fails, you can go do something else.
Yeah.
If you don't have a passion, go and earn some money.
Well, and now I think it's also easier now to test that. Like, you could be in insurance, you could be in sales, you could be in marketing and have a Substack, right?
Yeah.
And start a podcast and start a TikTok. Like you can kind of multitask a little now with your careers a little more easily than you could then. But I mean, as with all things, and I'm talking to someone who's a financial professional, but having a safety net and having savings just gives you so much freedom.
Yeah.
And that's why, I'm so passionate about closing the pay gap, about getting women wealthy, not because I want a Ferrari, I mean, power to you if that's what you want, but because when you've got money in the bank, you have choice, right? You have choice to leave a shitty job. One of the women in the PepTalkHer community, Sam, she came into our career level up course maybe 4 years ago. All she wanted to do was earn 6 figures. She's like, I just want to get to 100 grand. And in my head, like we've had people that have gotten to seven figures. So I was like, well, that's easy. Okay. And I knew we would do it for her. I knew we could help her. And sure enough, in like maybe 8 or 9 weeks, she was at 100 grand. Great. But what I didn't know, Sam, was what she then told me a couple of months later was she said, once I hit 6 figures, I saved enough such that I could leave my abusive husband. And she lived in a remote part of Australia at the time. And that money gave her choice. It gave her the freedom and the possibility to get the money together that she needed to get a studio apartment, to buy her own car, to drive out of there at night when he wouldn't notice. And that's the sort of thing that gives me goosebumps because it's like, that is truly life-changing. You know, Ferraris are life-changing too. Fancy houses in Saint-Tropez are amazing for the people that want them. But to me, it's those things of like, being able to leave a bad situation, being able to give your boss the finger and walk out the door to a job that you are much more aligned with, or being able to pay for dinner for your mate who just lost their job, right? Whatever that is for you, to take a sabbatical. Like, you know, my husband and I are thinking about like, how can we take a 6 month sabbatical with our son at some point in the next year or two? So like, to me, it's like, that's why wealth excites me, because it gives you so many options to do really cool things with your life that maybe doesn't fit the 9 to 5 mold that a lot of us were raised to think was normal and all that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think along with that, you know, there are more women investing in other women as well, and helping those women run their passion businesses and turn it into something and create more wealth.
Totally.
And I think and I love that ethos that you've got, which is it's not about having money to buy big, shiny things. It's about having that freedom. And I think that's relevant to everyone, but it's really relevant to women. Like that example from that woman from Australia, is how do I get myself out of a situation? Money is needed, right? So having that education and freedom and confidence is really important.
Yeah.
You've obviously had a really successful career. You run an amazing business. Can you give me a time where you've like really struggled with a failure, where something hasn't gone your way and you've really had to pick yourself up?
There have been so many. It's really hard to know where to start. And I think one thing about entrepreneurship is it really humbles you. You know, like even if you look at entrepreneurs on the world stage whose names you know, even when their share price drops, I'm sure that humbles them too. You know what I mean? And I think the good thing about the accelerator that I did was that like they made you pitch in front of everyone very, very quickly. So you got very used to like thinking on your feet, mucking it up, people saying that was terrible, people saying I love that. And so you learn not to take it personally. Honestly, I'm actually struggling to think of an example, not because I haven't had failures, because I have them every day, but just because now it's been almost 10 years since I've been running PepTalkHer and, you know, doing our executive coaching and running our leadership programs for clients. But now it's like water off a duck's back a little bit. Like one of our biggest clients, one of our biggest multi-6-figure global clients, they probably spent more than $500,000 with us, and they just kind of ghosted us. And I'm pretty sure they're going to come back, but at this point it's been almost 12 months. They will come back. There's a whole bunch of internal politics. I'm sure they're going to come back, but like that's a big gap in our budget that I had to figure out. I was like, well, I was banking on that revenue and I guess I'm going to have to hustle and figure it out, right? And also other things come up. Like I had a call this morning with one of our executive coaches who I truly admire, and she's brought in this new client to our business that's really exciting and really amazing. So it's like the good with the bad. I honestly don't even let myself dwell on those anymore. I've made lots of mistakes as a leader. I think I'm a pretty good leader. I'm a terrible manager, Sam. I'm not actually great in the day-to-day of management. But what I've realized, and what I give myself grace for now, is understanding I'm very clear on what my strengths are. Mm-hmm. And by virtue of that, it's pretty obvious what my weaknesses are. And let me tell you, there are a lot. And what I intentionally do when I'm structuring my team now is I try and hire to support my weaknesses. I used to make the mistake of hiring people like me, but then when the wheels were still falling off, you know, it's because we all had the same strengths. And so when I left journalism, I spent maybe 6 to 9 months, honestly, just kind of like getting to know myself. I did a lot of work with a bunch of different coaches. I'm a huge fan of Gallup's Strength Finders. It's like $20. It's an assessment. You can do it online. I am not paid by them. I just love it. And it gives you your top 5 strengths and helps you understand that you're not weird. This is just where you should be playing. And so I'm kind of very clear on that now. And so I try and play there. And the stuff that I am bad at and I fail at, I just kind of go, well, let's fix it and let me hire someone else that can fix my mess or do that better next time. So I really, because our brains, one of the things that I've learned with neuroscience is that, and we teach this in a lot of our workshops too, our brains are hardwired for negativity. So because of the cavemen and women days, it was good, right? We needed to know the bear's going to attack us, the lion's going to eat us. Our brain still loves that. So when there's a negative news story, we love it. We're like, oh my gosh, did you read about that? So bad, etc. When there's a good news story, maybe with the exception of Taylor Swift's engagement, when there's a good news story, you hear about it for a little bit and then everyone kind of forgets the next day. When it's a bad news story, we spiral. And it's the same thing with our brain in business. Like if I make a mistake, the default is to want to spiral for the next month. And I've really trained myself to address it as an issue, see it as a data point and a fact that I can solve for, and then I move on. So I really try not to take it personally. Otherwise, I'd never get out of bed, Sam, the amount of mistakes I make.
But it's such a healthy attitude. And I love that. You're right. Our brains, we have to retrain our brains to focus on the positive, right? Because the reality is, and I was speaking to someone earlier today who actually gave me a great piece of advice, which is you're allowed 2 minutes to spiral.
Yes.
Oh my God, what if it all goes wrong?
Yep.
But only if you then have 2 minutes thinking, what if it all goes right?
Oh, that's a great framing. And I remember doing that during COVID, Sam. I remember it's a long story, but I was in quarantine in Australia and COVID was happening. It was very clear that the world was shutting down. I was like, do you know what? I'm going to have 48 hours of eating chocolate and watching Netflix and spiraling, and then I'll figure it out. But I'm just going to have 2 days of absolute wallowing what is happening, which I did. A lot of Lindt chocolate was consumed. And then I was like, okay, let's get back to it. Let's figure this out, and I think that you're right. It's okay to be with those emotions. Susan David is an amazing emotions expert out of Harvard. She has a PhD. She has an amazing book. I randomly met her on a retreat recently. And she was such a fascinating woman. You should definitely check out her TED Talk and her book. But like she was kind of teaching me when we had these interactions about use emotions as data, but don't let them necessarily drive every decision you make. It can be a piece of data, but it's not the whole, it's not the whole piece.
I love that.
Yeah.
So this leads us really brilliantly to the next question. Using all the data and the emotions that you've had over the years, what's the best decision you've ever made?
I feel like the best thing that probably ever happened to me was the privilege, and I had no control of this, of being born in Australia. Like being born with an Aussie passport to a loving family. I just am so grateful for that every day. I have a lot of friends here in the United States, many of whom are undocumented, and the stress level and the life-changing challenges that presents people with is next level. And so I'm so grateful that I personally don't have to deal with that. So that's one piece of luck that I think really changed the trajectory of my life. In terms of the best decision I ever made, I don't know. Like, that's a really great question. Probably the best decision I make daily is like betting on myself. And I guess it's something that my parents probably pushed me towards when I was at school, which was like, go to school, love to learn, great things will happen. So that was kind of a push. And I guess it became a mantra that I believed. And now it's almost like, I was like, I could become a journalist. Like I could move to London. I could move to New York. So I guess it's that consistent like betting on myself. So I wouldn't say it's like one decision that changed everything, but I think it's a consistent, like we're having an issue with cash flow right now in my business. And I'm like, I could choose to spiral or I could choose to be like, I'm going to figure this out. And that's the decision that I'm making at a micro level almost daily, honestly. It's almost like being Delulu, I think is what the cool kids say these days, being Delulu about yourself every day. I don't know other cool phrases, but that's one that my younger friends say, Delulu. So maybe I'm just like Delulu about possibility of believing in myself and backing myself. So that's maybe the thing that I would say is a muscle that everyone listening might want to flex is like really back yourself, because no one's coming to save you. Like no one else is coming to save us. That's the reality, right? Things can change in an instant, and at the end of the day, it's you, yourself, and you, and that is your safety net, right?
Yeah, completely. So moving on from the best decision, I'm sure, like many people and like me, you've both given and had a lot of advice over the years.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you were given that you completely ignored?
So it's funny. I've talked a little about doing this accelerator all those years ago, and I was like, I'm going to start a scalable tech business and la la la, and like, because I always had a services business. When I was a journalist, I always had a side hustle of a media training company. So that was like always my side hustle thing that I kind of had on the side. And I was like, services are the worst. I'm going to like scale a tech business, etc. And everyone has said to me, I was at a retreat last week in Mexico, and someone was like, services are so hard to scale. And I think the advice that services are so hard to scale is the advice that I have always known. And evidently, here I am running a scalable executive coaching service business for my clients. And it's funny though, because and I wanted to start a tech company, and we do have an app. We have a free PepTalkHer app, which is kind of like, I always say to people, it's kind of like a Fitbit, except instead of tracking your workouts and your runs, it tracks your wins at work. So we do have like a tech component to the business, but it's part of our impact stream, and it's a free app. So we don't make any money out of it. It costs us thousands of dollars a year, but we do it because we want to help people be able to track their successes and, advocate and negotiate for themselves. But yeah, the piece of advice that I've ignored that's probably to my detriment monetarily is services businesses are hard to scale, which is true. And I also love running a services business because I'm a people person and I love it. And I think you can have huge ripple effects of change when you impact leaders' lives at a deep level. So I do love it, but it is, from a scalable perspective, it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have touched on the answer to this already, because you've already given so many amazing nuggets for people to take away. But we like to ask all of our guests to set our listeners a personal challenge. So if you could set all of our listeners just a small personal challenge for them to take, what would that challenge be?
So I'm going to go off piste, and maybe I'm going to suggest two challenges. So the first challenge is to start talking about money. I would love us to kind of shelve the shame of money and the stigma that's associated with talking about money and wealth, particularly for women. Unfun fact for your listeners, the gender pay gap actually starts in childhood. Would you believe it? Because there's been 3 studies in 3 countries that proves that the pay gap actually starts when kids get their first allowance or pocket money. So we're talking 7 or 8 years old, right? So I give you that statistic because it's kind of just to give us a sense of how entrenched this is. It's not our fault that we find it awkward to talk about money or that we're paid less. This is a systemic issue that needs changing. But anyway, so the first thing is, I double dare you this weekend at brunch or at coffee or at dinner, talk about your salary with your BFF or someone who you trust, your roommate, whoever that is. And then the second challenge is, I would love people to grab out their cell phones. Grab out your mobile phone, not if you're driving, safety first. But if you're not driving, get out your mobile phone. And I just want you to text your bestie, your cousin, your partner, just someone who loves, trusts, and respects you. So I just want you to text one person. And I just want you to say, hey, I'm listening to this podcast and they've set us a challenge. And the challenge is to reach out to one person and ask them, what would you say is my greatest strength? And that's it. I just want you to put that question out into the ether to someone who you trust, and let's see what you get back. Because so often we spiral in our head of all the things that we failed at or that we're not good at or that we haven't done. And we forget that the way that the world sees us is often very shiny and very sparkly in ways that we wouldn't identify for ourselves, right? And so getting external feedback is one of the best things that you can do to kind of spark some joy, maybe spark some excitement for momentum for the next step for you. Whether that is staying in the job that you love, but having more courageous conversations. Whether that is going for that promotion, or whether that is starting a side hustle or throwing it all away like I did and starting a business. Whatever that step is for you, I respect that for you. And I want you to know that there's people around you who are excited for you and who want to cheer you on. So the first step in sending this text is to just kind of start to find and identify and cultivate the cheerleaders around you who want you to succeed, because they exist. See me as a cheerleader, find me on LinkedIn, Meggie Palmer, and say hi and let me know what your text came back with, because I want you to succeed too, right? And when we find those people around us, possibility starts to really appear. And that's what excites me in my life, when people around me create possibility for me and give me ideas and thought bubbles I'd never considered. And so I would love the challenge to be for your listeners, Sam, for them to start to create a conversation, to start some thought bubbles for what's possible for them too.
Brilliant. And I'm going to do that with my phone once I get off. So I will.
Yay! Let me know what they say.
I will.
Yeah.
I'm slightly terrified. Depends on my message.
Well, I always say don't text your brother, because I did this as an exercise once. I texted my brother and he's like, oh, what are you doing? Like, younger brothers, maybe not the right person to text, but text someone other than your younger brother.
Yeah. Okay, will do. So I can't believe it, but we've got to the end of the podcast. So we've got to our final question. And I've loved listening to your journey and your nuggets. And, obviously I know PepTalkHer anyway, but just learning more and letting the listeners learn more about what you do and the absolute clear passion you have for making a difference and talking about money and helping women to own that wealth. Mm-hmm. If you could take all of the things that you've learned so far in your journey into adulthood and put one of those things, one of those learns into the guide, what would you put in?
So I think my humble piece of advice for the guide, which I love, by the way, and I'm excited. I hope this is becoming a book, Sam, because I want to be the pre-order of 100 copies to send to all the women in our mastermind. But the advice for me that I would want to put in there is my favorite quote. And that quote is, leap and the net will appear. And I just love that quote, leap and the net will appear. And I think that applies to taking a brave step in your career, maybe taking a brave step into or out of a relationship or a friendship or moving countries, starting a business. When you take that first step, it is remarkable how quickly the net appears. And that net can look very different for all of us. But people who are there to hold you, to support you, to propel you forward, in my experience, have appeared. And taking that brave step is the hardest bit. And so if you need someone to push you over the edge, I can be that person. But really leaping and leaping into the trust and knowing that like possibilities are going to show up for you. And so apply that how you will to your current situation. But that would be my one piece of advice.
Brilliant. Fantastic advice. That's definitely going in the book.
Yay! Well, I can't wait to, as I say, I'm pre-ordering all of the copies. Yeah, because I also think, like, Sam, it's funny how in small micro ways, all of us can really be a part of this change trajectory in the sense of, like, anytime my friend have a book coming out, like, I try and pre-order like 20 to 50 copies. To be fair, I have a business, so I can expense that, but I just try and do that because, like, and then everyone gets it for Christmas and birthdays. But like, we always give our gifts to our executive coaching clients from female-owned businesses or Black female-owned businesses where we can, and I just like, it's like a small little way of when you're spending $50, $100, $300, but like when you spend that money in a certain way, that really changes the trajectory of cash flow in the economy, as you know, and that can take, take us away from the fact that right now they reckon it's going to take 200 years before we get to equality. And I'm just not really willing to accept that statistic. So if we could, everyone listening, start to take some micro changes, then what if we could actually reduce that time frame, right? Like, to me, that's a really exciting possibility.
That might also have to go in the guide, but we're going to stop there. Can't fit everything in. Meggie, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, telling us your story, sharing your nuggets and your pieces of advice, and looking forward to seeing what comes next for you.
It's a privilege, and I can't wait to read the book. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do like, follow and subscribe wherever you watch or listen to us. Next week, we are interviewing Karen Borsha Marcon, who's the founder of the VIA Academy. We get to learn lots about her life, her jet setting and living around the world as a truly global citizen, and what she's learned about being a grown-up. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.